And before we get into the details of it, let me remind you that each of you have received a raffle ticket that will help you be, if you're selected, be one of the two lucky people that will each win a certificate good for a place on Captain Matt Starling's inshore fishing charter. It's a value of about $350. And if any of you have been fishing with Matt, you know that he's an outstanding captain and you're likely to catch some excellent fish. Tonight's agenda looks like this. We'll begin the meeting with fishing stories, talk a little bit about the clinic that we're going to be holding soon, going through Lagoon guides. I'm going to ask Jeff Harper, who's the director of our Lagoon committee, to lead us through that information. Then we're going to pass it on to Frank Wood. Frank Wood is the chairman of our fundraising campaign for 2021. He'll give us a brief update as to what's happening. And then the reason why you're all here is to listen to Sean Burges, who's the Public Works Director. Sean's been around here for several years. He's a tremendous supporter of CCA, and we work exceptionally well together. And he's got a good story about the secret underground watering system of the landings. And he's going to tell us about how each of the different watering systems and lagoons are all tied together and are working together as a system. And following question and answers that you may have for Sean, we'll ask Dave DeVore, who's the president of the CCA Skidaway Island chapter, to wrap up the meeting with us. So let's begin with fishing stories. This is usually the opportunity that we ask each of you to participate in and to give us a little feedback as to how your days have been going fishing, not only the lagoons, but also out in the inshore and offshore situation. And I'm going to ask Jeff Harper to lead us in this discussion. Jeff?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Vic. As you can see on your screen, there are a couple different shots here, and I'll explain them to you. What we do as CCA is to maintain these lagoons and try to keep them as healthy as possible, both vegetation management and fish management. The top picture on the left-hand side is part of our electrofishing series, and we do this once a year. And what we do, and you can sort of see in the picture these poles that are coming out of the boat, and they're attached to electrodes, and they shock the fish just momentarily, and they rise up, and we capture them in nets, and we put them in a tank, and we weigh them, and we measure them to see how healthy they are and to see how they're doing as far as their particular lagoon. Some fish will be smaller, and these are typically bass that we're looking at, because that can tell us a lot about the lagoon. Some fish will be smaller than they should be, and that tells us that we need to add more food in there. Some fish will be larger than we expect, which means that lagoon doesn't need any help at all. Below, on the bottom rung of all that, you can see some of the bass that we pulled out on this last electrofishing, which was a couple of weeks ago. And we can't do this, by the way, without these volunteers that you're looking at and any volunteers that help CCA. That's the lifeblood of this organization. Up in the far right, I need to say, had nothing to do with electrofishing. That's just a really cute picture of Rick Hackett's granddaughter. I don't know, Rick, are you on the line?
Rick Armstrong.
Yeah, I am on that. That is my granddaughter.
Yeah. Can you tell us about that?
Well, they were out fishing on Easter Sunday, her and her dad, and this was the proverbial one last cast fish. And they picked it up in one of the local lagoons. It fought like crazy. It was a female, probably on the nest, and it was just full of eggs. So they quickly got it back in the lagoon, and hopefully all those eggs will end up to be the same size as that bass. That bass ended up being 5.16 pounds.
That's a great story, and that's exactly the story. You know, we want many more of those, and we'll get there with the kind of management that we're doing.
Can we just spend a moment to it seems to be some background noise, if we need someone to mute.
Annie?
You? Go ahead, I'm sorry. uh,
Okay, as a piggyback to the stocking or to the shocking, we do stocking as well. We take the information that we get from the shocking, along with something else we do, which is seining, where we take a net and go around the perimeter of the lagoon and capture the small fry and see, you know, how many hatches we have and how prevalent some of the smaller fish are. We do that after we do the stocking, and we take the stocking information and the shocking information and the seining information, and this is how we come to determine which lagoons need what to stay healthy. We just did the fish stocking 2 weeks ago, and again, there's a picture of our volunteers, and I can't hit this note hard enough. We need as many volunteers for these kinds of things as possible. It's a really fun day, one. Two, you get to meet some of your fellow anglers or people that are interested in what we're doing. So it's an important thing. Below, on the left-hand side picture, it's what we do. We take fish from the big truck, which is the picture on the right-hand side in the bottom, and we have a bucket brigade, and we throw these small fry into the lagoons, and it's based on an equation that we've come up with, how many fish need to be put in particular lagoons. And we hope that it all works out. The fish that we get, we put in over 15,000 fry in just 13 lagoons this past couple of weeks. That's a lot. And the good news is the fry that we get, and we pick these particularly, they'll spawn, or excuse me, they'll reproduce in 45 days, which means we double the equation. So our lagoons are well. I do want to draw your attention to the picture at the bottom right-hand side. That's Jeff Wong, who's been a longtime supporter of CCA. He is of Chinese descent, and you know the Chinese worship fish, and he every year comes out and he blesses our fish before we put them in. I don't know if it helps, and Jeff, if you're on, maybe you can tell me, but I will tell you that some of the fry that we threw in, I automatically saw some big fish eat them. So I don't know if you did a good job or a bad job on the blessing. I don't know which way it went, but we appreciate Jeff's support on all of this. He's been a really great guy to have, you know, as part of our team.
Thank you.
Oh, good, you're there.
No, this is Vic.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Okay. All right, what are we doing here?
Lagoon guides.
Okay, yeah, lagoon guides. If you don't have a lagoon guide, you're sort of limiting yourself. We have a new series of ones that have come out. Hal Evans has done a great job. He and his team have done a great job of putting some new information in them. They are invaluable to those of us that know these lagoons really well and to people that don't. They'll tell you which lagoons are saltwater, which lagoons are fresh. They'll give you some idea about how to fish these lagoons. And there's all sorts of valuable information. It's the best deal possible. I mean, it's $10. I mean, you can't get a McDonald's meal for much less than that. And it helps you join CCA as well. So I would encourage anybody who's interested in the lagoon fishing and even just walking lagoons, so that you know what you're walking next to. Or you'd be surprised. You know, you see a fish jump, you'd like to know what that is. Could be a saltwater, could be a freshwater. So I would encourage anybody to get in touch with Hal directly and get one of these lagoons. They're a fabulous resource.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. Appreciate the insight.
All good.
Now I'd like to introduce Frank Wood. Frank Wood is the chairman of our fundraising campaign, and he's going to just update us on what's happening in 2021 thus far. Frank? Hello? Frank? Is Frank on,
Yeah.
Bill?
I'm looking right now. Here he is, Frank. Yeah, I gotta make sure, Frank, you need to unmute. Frank, we can't hear what you're saying. Is there a problem with your mic, maybe?
So, can you tell if he's muted or?
He is not muted.
He's not muted if it's the only Frank I see on the screen.
Yep.
Okay, well, then let me
I'll send him another note to maybe.
well, let me just summarize where we're at.
Okay.
As you can see, Frank prepared these charts and he can explain them a lot better than I. But as you can see that we've reached a goal of 75% donated thus far. We have a budget of what, $21,000, something along those lines. And thus far, we're at $15,025. And we'd like to thank you. And the reason why we need this money is for the programs that we have in place. And you've heard Jeff talk a little bit about the seining and the shocking and the stocking. And also we have some Sputniks that we put down there so that the fish can be safe and we have an opportunity to catch them. And that's so that you folks can enjoy it. And see, we'd like to ask you to, if you would donate, please send your check or money order to Jerry Thompson. He's our treasurer, and that's his address. And I'm sure you've heard about Jerry by now. And please consider donating. Or you can pay by PayPal or credit card. Either way, we'd be real happy if you participated with us. Okay, sorry that you had to listen to me and not the fellow who understands what he's talking about. But now the reason why you're all signed in here is to listen to Sean Burges. And Sean, as I indicated earlier, is the Public Works Director for TLA. He's been at the landings 15 years or more, and he's just a tremendous individual. Are you on, Sean?
I am. I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen and presentation.
Okay.
Can everyone hear me okay and see the screen?
You got my screen there, I think. I have to exit this,
There
right?
you go. He's all set. Now you're at Sean's screen.
All right, perfect. All right, let's get going. What we're going to talk about today is really one of the most unique lagoon systems that we have within what I would say in the Southeast. One of the challenges that the Brandenburg organization had with development is developing a drainage system that was appropriate, and not only appropriate for the low country, but also something that was seen as an asset and a value. So we're going to talk about kind of the system as a whole, and then we're going to drill down a little bit into the different functions of our lagoon system. And then from there, we're going to do a short little focus on fishery management. Obviously, as this is CCA, everyone has a little bit of an interest in kind of the fishery management program and how it all ties together. I'd say the group did a great job kind of introing some of this information. So let's get going through this process. So as you think about really as water is falling onto this island, all the water has two options. It's going to hit either a permeable or non-permeable source. With the permeable, it would be something like your yard or a natural area, and it can actually percolate into the soil. The non-permeable areas are the areas like your roof, driveways, sidewalks, where that water actually has to be funneled into a system, collected, and then discharged into the lagoons. I always kind of chuckled coming from Wisconsin. I really wasn't sure what a lagoon was, but I had a very good understanding of what stormwater retention ponds were. We did a lot of work with those, but that was part of the kind of the ambiance, if you will, of this community is that they view their stormwater retention ponds, and we view our stormwater retention ponds as lagoons, and really have the expectation to maintain them to that standard. So this is kind of the water cycle that, as you can see, as it's kind of working through. So everything starts with rain. Water then will fall down into a permeable or non-permeable area. It then gets transferred through our underground storm drain pipe system, where it's allowed to settle into a lagoon. And really there's a couple different functions of the lagoon other than just stormwater retention that the community uses it for, and we'll go into that here in a little bit. From there, the water is actually controlled by a weir system. We have multiple water control systems throughout the lagoons, and a lot of the times this controls the water before it's discharged into the marsh, helps set the elevation of the water in the lagoons themselves. And in a lot of cases, separates from what would be fresh to saltwater lagoons. And that's why you can have a very unique fishing environment out here, where you can fish on one side of the road and catch redfish, and then go over to the other side and catch a largemouth bass, which is pretty unique. And then ultimately all the water will discharge back down into the marsh environment around the island, and then start that process over again with evaporation. And we kind of repeat that cycle, the water cycle, over and over again. So let's talk about drainage and how it all kind of works together. One very unique thing that the Brannigan organization put together, especially in the Marshwood section of the community, is they did a lot of natural swale systems. This is an example of Lanny's Way North, where Lanny's Way North and Bartram come together. You can see everything from the road itself will sheet flow down into this low-lying ditch area. The elevation change in the ditch is very minimal, and essentially it's made to allow that water to percolate into the soil. If you get a heavy rain, like we did a few Sundays ago, where we got 3.5, almost 4 inches of rain in a couple-hour period, then the drainage pipe will essentially funnel and channelize that water to a infiltration area. So you can see the front side of this pipe is in the picture on the left, and on the right, you can see the discharge actually discharging back into the nature preserve area. So again, a great function of being able to control the stormwater off the roadways, all the non-permeable with the cart pass. Heavy in regular rainfall events, we just would have the water would be able to percolate into the soil. And I will say that natural soil percolation is probably one of the best filters there is. That's really the model that's used with everything from a pool filter to activated carbon filters to try to purify water is trying to emulate that soil percolation. And then to have infiltration areas where when you get heavy storm events, to have that water be able to be discharged if it is past the saturation point of the soils, gives you a secondary area. The other great thing with this, again, is the water is being filtered and essentially cleaned prior to getting back into the groundwater table. The main thing we're going to talk about today is all of our non-permeable drainage and how that all kind of works together. So indirectly, the water that hits the drainage swales and percolates down into the ground will add to the groundwater table. When you think of our lagoons, the groundwater table, and we get this in the summer, we have a lot of, from time to time, we'll have residents say, hey, can we put a shallow well into our lagoon? Can we pump water back into the lagoon, raise the level up? Well, with our soils and the percolation rates, the only real barrier, if you will, to our lagoons is the groundwater table. So when you see the lagoons, you're really seeing the groundwater table, which is kind of resisting or holding that water at those levels. In the summer, when the groundwater table starts to drop, you'll start to see those lagoons drop back down. What gives you that instant gratification or recharge is when the non-pervious is allowed to drain into that lagoon system. So again, when you're thinking about non-pervious drainage, thinking of things such as roadways, cart paths, parking lots, driveways, rooftops, all that water has to go somewhere, and it's all designed to go through the system and to be able to drain into our stormwater retention ponds. The stormwater retention ponds there then are essentially, one, holding the capacity of the water, two, having a design control discharge point, and then three, providing some natural filtration to allow some of the sediment and other things that get trapped in the system to fall out. So they will, with time, actually start to fill back in, which is kind of the natural progression for a pond or lagoon or retention ponds themselves. So the first line of defense with trying to keep our ponds and lagoons as pristine as possible is our street sweeper program. A lot of times people will think about our street sweepers and say, oh, it's an aesthetic. It makes the streets look so much better. When the street sweeper comes through, everything looks clean. Well, what happens if that material is not cleaned up, it ends up going down into a catch basement and then ends up into our storm drain pipe, and then ultimately will get discharged out into a lagoon. In some cases, in the summertime, you may see if we get a heavy rainfall and a lot of materials on the streets, you'll actually see what almost looks like a cigar shoot out of some of our lagoon storm drain pipes. And it's a plug, if you will, of material that's been bound together, and it's coming out of the storm drain pipe all at once. And what that means is that our sweepers weren't able to get the material, and then secondarily, our vacuum jetter truck scenario wasn't able to clean that prior to a large storm event. Or we had what I'd call a gully washer rain, where it just cleans out everything. The amount of watershed is immense. Our street sweepers are running on a 10-day cycle, so every 2 weeks. And again, the goal is to get all this material, sand, silt, leaves, pine straw, trash, before it gets down into the storm drain system. The other thing, believe it or not, that we see a lot of that gets down into our storm drain system is newspapers. And so you'll see that from time to time. Once we get a heavy rain, a newspaper will end up out in the lagoon system, and then our lagoon crew will actually remove that during their normal process. The other thing the street sweepers do is they also will help for any of the in-grate or in roadway grates, which is example right here. It helps keep those operational. These are typically on our tertiary streets, which are the smaller kind of hammer handle streets throughout the community. And very quickly, as you can see with this one, pine straw will build up on these and cause some slow drainage issues during heavy rain events. So they're really the first line of defense to go out and make sure that we're addressing that. Once the water then hits the street and starts to run through our curb and gutter, that's another interesting thing, is a lot of people think of the curb and gutter as a device to help keep cars on the road. But with our curb and gutter system, that's actually designed as part of the drainage system to actually take the water and direct it via gravity feed to an inlet box, which we have over 1,500 inlets throughout the community to allow that water to flow into our catch basin system. Once it's into the catch basin, it goes into our piping system, which is about 80 miles of storm drains underground. One of our largest assets that we have as a community, most critical assets, and one that we're currently working through, doing a lot of work on to slip line and repair prior to any kind of failures within that system. All this water then will go through the 375 different catch basins and then ultimately discharge out of 389 outfalls that we have throughout the community. We do evaluate with both staff and engineers all of our storm drain systems, typically on a 3-year cycle. We developed then a kind of a scheduled replacement based off of really the construction, the material, and what we're seeing as far as the aging or asset life remaining within the system itself. Historically, we've spent in the ballpark and capital expenses of about $150,000 per year, but we have elevated that up to about $512,000 per year. Really trying to address a lot of the different materials that were put into the system as far as piping. So most of our pipes are concrete. We are lucky. We also have some other materials that were used during construction. Plastic pipes are typically HDPE or ABS pipes that are placed in. We don't have as many plastic pipes. One of the biggest challenges with the plastic, obviously, is it doesn't deteriorate as quick, but it does have buoyancy. So if we have a groundwater table that's only a few feet under the ground, you have to have enough soil coverage over the top of the plastic pipes to keep them from floating actually up through the surface of the soil. We've had a few of these pipes. There's one on Bartram I can remember that looked like a dragon. We had a heavy rain event and the actual pipe actually lifted and because it didn't have enough cover, which was eventually pulled out, replaced with a concrete pipe. Pretty interesting thing too is we have a varied range in sizes of pipe with storm drains. They range anywhere from 12 inches all the way up to 72 inches. 72 inches, I can walk right down the middle of it. And a good example of a 72-inch pipe is at the end of Lagoon 1. If you've ever been down to the overflow structure that's located there, the large little pavilion or the little seating area that's at the end sits over the top of 2 72-inch pipes, which in turn drain all of really from Bartram near the nature trail all the way up through Landing's Way, Priest Landing, all the way down. That entire chain drains through those 2 lagoons. Kind of a neat picture. This is inside of an oblong concrete storm drain pipe off of Brandonberry. And then you can see what is hanging down actually is an inlet that is cut into the top of the pipe that actually is allowing water in, and some of the vegetation is actually growing down in. One of the biggest challenges with our pipes is obviously if they're holding water, all the vegetation wants to have that water, so it'll try to send its roots down into those pipes as a water reservoir. And I'll show you some pictures of that here in a minute. This is a great just picture from our GeoThink, which is our GIS based system that we use to capture a lot of the information on our storm drain system. Again, we have over 80 miles of storm drain pipes. The very unique thing about our lagoons is that most of our pipes are considered wetted, where they were designed and installed underwater, so that you don't see nearly all the inlets and outlets of these lagoons, or the interconnectivity of any of the lagoons where the pipes are located. And again, it's a design feature. The expectation is not stormwater retention, but to have an aesthetic that would be consistent with lagoons. So most of the piping system's actually underground and hidden, and most of the equalization is between the lagoons. You can also get an appreciation here too of just the interconnectivity of all these lagoons. A lot of times, when we're talking with CCA and the fishery management group, we're trying to manage to a single pond. And it's important to remember from a fishery standpoint that these lagoons are really like one large chain or reservoir type system. And so trying to manage to a single location is very difficult. However, if you look at the system as a whole, you're going to be a lot more successful. And then part of the angler's challenge is figuring out how these fish are using these different ponds based off of the time of year. So in the spring, typically the smaller ponds are more active with bass on the beds and bluegills on the beds. And then in the summertime, when the temperatures get very warm, a lot of those fish will then move through the underground piping system and move into the larger freshwater reservoirs in the center parts of a lot of the phases of development. And again, it's just like if you think of it from a reservoir system, those fish are going to utilize the little fingers and creeks and those kind of areas seasonally, and then move into the deeper water at different times. So when you're out fishing or thinking about those things, kind of think of it, in those terms, and it'll help you to kind of target where those fish may be. The other item that we have, so now, the water's in the piping system. It hasn't got to a lagoon yet. We're trying to get as much organic debris out before it can get into the lagoon. We actually just purchased this new vacuum jetter trailer. You can see the picture on the top left here. This trailer was actually an immense savings for the Landings Association. Our previous, if you've ever saw the giant orange vacuum jetter truck driving around the community, that's about a $320,000 asset. We looked at replacement this past year, and our construction manager, Bill Campbell, did an excellent job going out and looking at the market. We were able to buy this jetter trailer that is more capable than the truck we had from a pressure and a water capacity standpoint, and it was a third of the cost. What that then required us to have to do is to figure out a creative solution for the vacuum side, which the vacuum is what we do. So this when you send a high pressure hose down the storm drain, you can see there's a chisel head on the front of it and a high pressure stream that comes out. That'll break it through any kind of clogs or debris that's stuck in the pipe. And there's 3 to 4 jets that shoot backwards. So the goal is, once this pipe or this large pressure hose is able to bust through any kind of debris or organic material, you pull it back. And as you pull it back, that high pressure with those 4 jets actually pulls all that material back to the catch basin. And then from there, you need to remove the material, and we are able to do that by actually modifying our Ravo our street sweepers. So you'll see all of our street sweepers now have actual bypass systems on them with the capacity to actually come through and suck out those inlets. So now we work in combination. The street sweepers are cleaning out our inlets on a regular basis. The vacuum jetter truck can work independently. And we had a major reduction in the amount of capital costs associated with replacement. And we have greater flexibility in our programs of how we can manage that. And again, the goal is to get as much of that organic debris out of the storm drain pipe system before it gets to the lagoons. Give you just some examples of some of the failures that we typically see with our lagoons, with our storm drain system. You can see the picture on the far right. This is one of our corrugated metal pipes, aluminum pipes, a lot of people refer to them at. You can see this large structure coming in. That's a pine tree root. And you can see what happens. Those roots will find a seam or a hole in the pipe. As soon as they're able to get those root hairs in, they find the water. and those roots will swell up and get to the point. This one's about the size of your forearm. However, it's problematic because now that the roots are in there, the fibrous roots start to grow, start to pull the water out of the pipe, and now we start to get large blockages behind these roots. If anyone remembers Lanings Way North and Sanaki, that is an area that we always had a real slow drain, and a lot of our challenges before we were able to go in and repair and actually remove all the roots from that storm drain pipe system was exactly what was going on right here. The other issue, you have concrete pipe. Concrete pipe, there's in the late 70s, early 80s, when they're installing it, they had a lifting eye or a hole in the top of the pipe that typically they put a brick and some concrete on. It essentially was the fail point, and you can see here is where one of those lifting eyes is the concrete has broken loose or the roots have gotten past it and they're starting to come down into the pipe. The other challenge we're having with our concrete pipe is our joints or our seams. The pipes themselves can last up to 100 years. However, the rubber gaskets that separate or that join between the two sections of pipe, actually we're starting to see failures in. And what that again allows is just that small crack is all that a root needs to be able to get into the storm drain pipe and start to move and cause some of the sinkholes from above. Here's a great example of a sinkhole that occurred. This was on Oyster Reef. We had a call on a Thursday afternoons. It's actually a C-click fix. Said, hey, there's a small pothole forming on the road. By about 2 o'clock, our crews were out. They excavated out. We were able, with our mapping system, to understand that the storm drain pipe was running through there. You can see we actually had a separation between the two sections of pipe, which was allowing all this soil to flow into the storm drain system, and then ultimately causing the failure in the road above. And that's another reason that it's so critical to be able to truly correct these issues with slip lining or some kind of non-conventional repair prior to any sort of failures, because our biggest challenge is the number and the number of assets and type of assets that are sitting above these storm drain systems. So again, by Thursday afternoon, we were able to have this sealed back up. Friday morning, we actually were lucky, had a road paving contractor under contract at the time, repacked the entire hole, and then had a small patch in the middle of Oyster Reef now that people don't even notice the difference. But again, that was all due to a failure within the storm drain. So now the water started, it's hit the roadways, it's gone down into our first catch basin, it's gone into our storm drain piping system, which now is directing it down into a lagoon. And again, the primary goal of this lagoon system is stormwater retention. And so when the civil engineers are working through designing really the system, they're looking at the total non-permeable versus permeable and trying to figure out how much water will occur during a certain rain event. And then we have to have storage and capacity for that water system, for that water to have somewhere to go throughout the system. So our lagoons are essentially our storage tanks. Give you a little bit of background on the lagoon systems. We have 151 lagoons, 153 actually, if you consider we have two that are subsets with 15A and 31A, but they're still, again, part of that chain. This equates to about 265 acres of surface water, pretty unique. Again, about half are fresh, half are saltwater or brackish. And again, the salinity is based off of how close they are, to the marsh and truly where they are in elevation. And the biggest pond or lagoon on the island is 9.8 acres, and that's Lagoon 15. And our smallest lagoon is 114 off of Brandenberry. Again, all these lagoons do have the capability via control structures to set the elevations, and they're all gravity fed with the ending discharge being into the marsh area. And so really the functions of these lagoons is, number one, it's stormwater retention. Number two is stormwater quality. Again, you're trying to get as much of the runoff, your sediment, any nutrients that have been picked up by the water to be essentially purified before it ever gets discharged into our marsh environment, so that we can have a pristine marsh in this area. It's really one of the reasons that a lot of us live here. Thirdly, the golf course will actually use the lagoons for irrigation. I strongly recommend, we've had some challenges with some residents putting their own irrigation pipes in the lagoons. I strongly discourage it. We'll actually ask you to remove them. And the main reason being is that a lot of our pesticide programs, lagoons that are dedicated for irrigation, have a different treatment program. If you're pulling from a lagoon and for irrigation and we're not aware of it, we can put products in there that essentially when your irrigation will turn on, it'll kill your entire yard. And so if you're irrigating, there's a whole different management program for those lagoons. So if you're thinking about it, it's incredibly dangerous, and ultimately your landscaping is probably a #1 asset that you don't want to compromise. Aesthetics. A lot of people, again, you know, if you go to a lot of different areas, the stormwater retention pond is hidden in the back. No one wants to see it. One of the unique things about how the Brannigan organization set this community up is that they made them an asset. And the other reason they're an asset is for recreation. And that's really kind of the charge, I think, with CCA and a lot of our residents. Our last community survey, 40% of residents had somebody in their household who fishes in the lagoons. Give you a point of reference, that's the same or slightly higher than the penetration of tennis in this community. So when you think of it from a recreational standpoint, you know, it's fishing, and somebody in the household fishing in these lagoons is really the top 5 kind of recreational opportunities for residents on the island. The other interesting thing, and this just to give you is another map that we have with GeoThink. This is part of the saltwater to be able to give you an idea of fresh versus brackish. You can see like Lagoon 4, Lagoon 5, these all actually have a tidal influx directly from the marsh. They're sitting at anywhere from 25 down to about 15 parts per thousand. So they are highly saline. And then as you move into the system, you come down to Lagoon 8, which is in the Village Green, very near the Marshwood campus. And you're really at that 5 to 10 parts per thousand with the brackish. Anything below 1 part per thousand is considered fresh. And so this gives you just kind of an idea of how unique and how our system kind of works together. The other interesting part, if you look at salinity, you can actually understand the elevation. So as each pond kind of gets a little bit darker through drainage, you know, it has the interconnectivity to the salt. And then you also know that there is no weir structure between these. It's just now a gravity feed. So when we do have a king tide or a full moon or spring tide, a lot of times you'll see a lot of these ponds that really aren't are almost fresh will become highly brackish, and we can have some fish kills associated with that. So let's talk a little bit about management, and we'll get into fisheries. So our stormwater management, again, we have 151 lagoons. We run around on a 10-day cycle to maintain. So every 2 weeks, the crews are going through inspecting. I will say in the spring of the year is when we struggle to keep up with some of the algal blooms. Everything seems to pop at once, and it's kind of that rule. Once the water temperatures get above 65 degrees, a lot of those algae species and submerged vegetation species will start to grow. So our crews will go out. We spray those with EPA-approved aquatic herbicides that are actually specifically designed to be placed into water. And part of the requirements for those herbicides is that they will be broken down incredibly quickly, typically by light or organic breakdown. So other than chemical control, we also do mechanical control and biological control. Excuse me. Biological control, if you've been out fishing and you see what looks like a submarine swim next to you, that is essentially a triploid grass carp. We put those in. They are herbaceous. They actually eat a lot of the vegetation within the pond. They give us, typically it takes about 2 to 3 years before you get some control from them. But again, it's a better option than having to utilize herbicides for the lagoons. And if the chemical control and the biological control don't work, then our typical last resort, if you will, is mechanical removal. And that's just good old fashioned rolling up your sleeves and pulling the material out. You can see in here, these mats are massive. This is a Lagoon 3. A lot of people refer to as a mile-long lagoon that goes between Landings Way North and Bartram. And this is truly just a miss in the timing of the treatment. We have about a 2-week window to get a treatment into this lagoon to prevent this aquatic vegetation from growing. If we miss it, once that material is able to top off, it's almost impossible to kill with chemical or biological control. So the only measure we have is to go in and mechanically or physically remove it, which I can tell you, Once you've had to do this once or twice, you'll learn the values of the other two options and making sure you're hitting everything on the right timing. The other thing we look at is really water quality. You can see here our lagoon numbers. We're looking at the amount of nutrients that are in the lagoons. Lagoon 2, a good example, you can see nitrate is very low, but our phosphates are high. A lot of this is directly associated with the bird rookeries that are located around these lagoons. In addition, we're looking at, and again, this was 8/19 of 2019, but we're looking at the dissolved oxygen. This is critical to make sure that we have a pond that is able to sustain fish. A lot of ponds in the summertime will try to go essentially anaerobic, where the oxygen levels drop very low. We look at pH as an indicator. We're seeing any switches or shifts in pH. We know we have some kind of infiltration. We're looking at temperature. Believe it or not, some of these ponds can reach almost 100 degrees in the summertime. We'll see typically very commons, mid-90s. And one of the challenges with the temperatures is essentially when we get a heavy rainfall, all of a sudden we have 60-degree rainwater that's going through our storm drain system into the lagoon, and it creates really a violent mixing of the water chemistries within the pond. And we can even have some fish kills in the summertime that are associated with that. And essentially what it is that water is coming in mixing. You have anaerobic water on the bottom, and this dissolved oxygen level will drop down to a level that's not suitable for the fish to live in. And you'll start to have fish will start to school together as a stress response, which in turn causes even more problems for them to start to have problems with essentially breathing. Turbidity we're looking at, this is the NTUs or the clarity of the water. We're trying to make sure, give you an example, 2.1 is almost what tap water. Tap water is usually around 1. 16 has a good amount of turbidity. And again, we're looking at kind of the suspended solids that are in the water. And then salinity. A good example, all of these, or Lagoon 2, Lagoon 70, Lagoon 40 are all irrigation lagoons for the golf course. Lagoon 106 is one that we put on the list that we've been monitoring during Irma. We actually had where the river coming up by Delagal actually came all the way over to Landing's Way South. And so it inundated Lagoon 106, which was a freshwater lagoon, and brought the salinity up to about 5.8 parts per thousand. So it's one that we're always looking at and making sure that we are understanding when we have any kind of changes in these water quality parameters. The next item that has to be addressed is if all that material that if we didn't have a storm drain program where we're going out and cleaning out the storm drains, if we didn't have a vacuum jetter program, if we didn't have our street sweeper program, we would have to have one massive dredging program to get all the sediment and materials out. We dredge the ponds to keep them at the design capacity for the lagoons themselves as far as the amount of water that they can hold. We do two different methods of dredging. We'll do a conventional, which is this is a long reach excavator. This is actually at the, I guess it would be the south end of the Kids Fishing Lagoon. You have your storm drain pipe coming in here, and essentially what happens is you start to form islands or mounds where all that sediment kind of can naturally settle out of the pond. We then dig that material out, let it sit for about 2 weeks, and then we'll try to haul it off site. And actually it's some great organic material, and typically we'll reutilize it for different projects around the community. The other method of dredging that you've probably seen around the community is hydraulic dredging, where we actually are able to put in a small auger style dredge. It then pumps the material. It agitates the soil sediment and turns it into a slurry. It pumps it into a giant geotextile bag, which is kind of interesting because it actually, you have to tie these down. They'll try to roll down into the lagoon. You can see there's the front of my truck right here, but we have to tie it down until you can get enough sediment in it so that it won't move. But this bag actually allows the water to percolate back out of the bag, but it catches all the organic debris. And then we'll let those bags sit typically for about 2 to 3 months so that they're in a solid state. We can then cut the bag open and remove the material. The beauty of this type of dredging, the hydraulic dredging, is historically you bring in a piece of equipment like this. 1, nobody wants it in their backyard. 2, the golf course definitely doesn't want it on the golf course. And then 3, you have to make some pretty massive runways for this to be able to get in. As this community is almost fully built out, we're at about, I think it's 96% now. This type of a method of dredging is becoming more and more difficult. You actually spend more money cleaning up after the dredging than you do on the actual dredging itself, versus the hydraulic dredging is a little bit more expensive, but typically you can remove more volume and you have less cleanup after it's all said and done. So it's a real cool technology that's really taken some large scale dredging and shrinking all that's technology down to something that's feasible for our system. And it's been working very well. Dylan Till, our environmental manager, has been doing a really good job managing those programs last year. So now the water is able to flow. You have most of your organic. You have essentially a purer system. The pond has done its kind of purification process. And then when all the water will come to a discharge point, which will actually overflow into the marsh. You can see this is Lagoon 36. You can see you have your overflow structure here, which is your primary overflow. That's going to set your elevation. It's going to control at what elevation the actual tide can come into the lagoon. And it's also going to set the elevation of top of water for the lagoon. And then there's a difference of about 2.5 to 3 foot between the pipe that's discharging the marsh and the top of the structure. This is another great example of a larger chain that has, you have your primary overflow, which this is going to handle 99% of all your overflow of water. And then this large rock structure behind it is actually part of the lagoon structure itself too. And this is the secondary overflow. So if we get to a point where this is maxed out, I believe this has a 42-inch pipe, but the 42-inch pipe associated with it is fully flowing as fast as it can, and we're still taking on water, then the second designed overflow is allow the water to go over a controlled structure to prevent any kind of backflow into our storm drain, and then ultimately into our roads. So again, kind of primary overflow and secondary overflow. This is another example of a cistern structure that we have in the lagoons, again, setting the water elevation. And the main reason I show this picture is we do have the capabilities in some of our large freshwater lagoons to actually drain these lagoons down. These are what we kind of call our hurricane valves. So if we are having a storm event, we will open the lagoons and start to drain the fresh water out. And essentially what we're trying to do is get a capacity. So if we get 3, 4, 7, 11 inches of rain, in a tropical type event, there's capacity within the ponds to capture that first initial flood, if you will, of rain. And again, the goal here is to try to prevent any kind of flooding back into the street or into private residential areas. These are good in general preparation for rain. I will say in a hurricane type event, and if we have a tidal event where the water is actually coming in from the ocean and rivers, these are not going to help us at all. I mean, that water is going to come in, it's going to find its path it's going to go to the path of the lowest elevation and work its way through. These will speed up the draining process. And one of the things that's really critical to make sure that everyone kind of understands and realizes is that the goal of the system during those type of events is to, once the water comes in, is to allow it all to discharge out through our design system and not to cause any additional erosion or damage associated with the water leaving as it did coming in. So again, this can help us in a rain event, but not as much in a tidal event. And so once the water's gone through this entire system, now it's discharged out into the marsh, and then it kind of goes through that whole evaporation process again. It'll get recycled into rain and start the whole process over again. Again, and then some of our other areas throughout the community, we have what are called marsh outfalls. If you see these, large concrete head wall with the pipe coming out, we do clean out these 64 marsh outfalls. We've put this into our Brightview contract, which I don't think they're as fond of, but I can tell you our guys are very fond of contracting this out versus doing it in-house. But essentially we'll maintain small pits, if you will, or cisterns at the bottom of these pipes. And the goal is to remove all this organic material before it ever gets into the marsh. And then we keep these clean so that we have a proper discharge out into the final section of the marsh. And you can see kind of the grasses that are all kind of growing around it. They love these little freshwater inlets throughout the area. All the material is really stacked up. And again, it needs about a week to 2 weeks to dry before we can haul it out, just so we're not kind of hauling a soupy mess and tracking it throughout the community. So let's talk a little bit about fishery management. So that's how we, again, where our water comes from, how it interconnects throughout the storm drain piping system, how the lagoons are set up by elevation, kind of dictates if they're fresh or salt water. And then we have CCA that really takes a great amenity and makes it better. And makes it a true amenity for our anglers, which is some of the programs that we have in place. I can't stress enough that your donations to CCA allow us to be able to have a fishery management program that otherwise would not be capable or available to our residents without the help of CCA. Again, TLA takes care of kind of the keeping the ponds functional, and then from a fishery standpoint is where CCA has stepped in. Some of the programs we'll go through are their fish docking, electrofishing, juvenile seining, fish structures, salinity testing, kids fishing lagoon, and other pavilion events. So just again, a little bit of history here. CCA and TLA have been working together hand in hand for the last 25 years. And it's really proven to be a winning combination. And I think I get that saying from Chuck Smith. Chuck's one of our members that has been
I was with him for a while.
from time to time and has been critical on kind of keeping these relationships working. Again, TLA manages lagoons, and then CCA provides volunteers and also
we just got together for a while
money to be able to fund these programs. And typically about $19,000 implemented for that.
Jeff, could you mute your phone, please?
And then, so what that means is over the last 25 years, CCA has raised over $400,000 to support our lagoon fishery management. And the goal with this program is really a science-based approach to looking at our fishery management and being able to have a quality freshwater fishery in an island that's surrounded by saltwater, which is pretty amazing within itself. And again, 40% of residents have somebody who fishes in the lagoons, and this is why this is so critical as looking at it from a perspective of a resource. Fish docking annually. This program is completed. Again, most of the goal here with fish docking is trying to make sure that we have a good balance of predator-prey relationships with the fish in the lagoons. So freshwater wise, bluegill, red ears, threadfin shad, golden shiners, those type of fish are available for the larger prey or the bass species. These are put in all based off of recommendations that come from our juvenile seining results and electrofishing results to tell us exactly what ponds need fish and where. And again, we're looking at it from a holistic and kind of from a system standpoint to understand how different sections of these ponds are being utilized by the fish and understanding that they can move back and forth throughout these chains. And so a lot of people say, well, we have 151 lagoons, but you're only stocking 25 to 30 lagoons. That's not really true because we're putting fish into these initial 25 to 30 lagoons, but they're able to move through that system to get through to all of the lagoons themselves. So, I mean, being able to stock those and having a healthy center point only is a trickle down effect that creates a healthy fishery throughout the entire system for our freshwater lagoons. Electrofishing, you saw some great pictures of this year's program that just occurred. This is completed annually and it's typically in the spring or late fall. And most of that's driven kind of by contractor. We don't have a shock boat, nor does CCA. So we'll work with a contractor, usually Roger Burge. And again, we're looking at about 20 to 30 lagoons for sampling. They go in, and as Jeff had said, essentially when you think about the electrodes, think about a taser. A lot of people have seen the video of a person being tased. Essentially, that's kind of what's happening with the fish. You have two electrodes sending electrical current across. The fish get disoriented and shocked. They float up to the surface. You scoop them out. You put them into a live well, and then you keep sampling around the pond. Typically, you'll look at about a 10% representative sample of the pond itself when you're electrofishing. And then you take the fish back to the shore, and you're able to do a length to weight ratio. And what this will tell you is one, how strong the predator-prey relationship is in the pond, and two, how healthy the fish are. There is a standard that's set up for, for instance, a 12-inch bass or a 15-inch bass, you'll weigh 1 pound. And so they'll go through to all the length weight ratios, and you want to be within 100 percentile of that standard. I will say our lagoons typically score in the 90 to 115%. So in most cases, we're doing better from a quality size of fish within these ponds. And that's also what helps dictate what ponds need additional either bass removed or prey species such as threadfin added. The other really cool thing about electrofishing, and I don't know if it's cool or if it's just frustrating, but you can go out and see that there are 5, 6, 7 pound bass in these lagoons. And then the next goal is trying to figure out how to catch them without a shock boat. So some great, really big bass you can see that come out of these lagoons. And then you can also see some of the, what I would call oddball species, you know, that you don't realize that are in these ponds, some of the brown bullheads, some of the gizzard shads, eels get into our freshwater ponds. So really unique if you get the opportunity and you have the time, definitely to go out and shadow these guys and give them and gals and give them an assistance with being able to electrofish. Juvenile seining, it's always kind of interesting to go out. Typically, the guy that gets to run the net along the edge of the lagoon is the guy that fits in the waders. And I think CCA for a while there has purposely only bought smaller shoe sizes, so only a few people get elected to run the net. But the goal of the juvenile seining is really to look at natural reproduction in the lagoon. You can see the picture on the right is actually my hand. You can see my wedding ring there. This is bluegill fry that's probably within a week to 2 weeks old, very new. And then on the left side, you can see some 3 to 5 inch bluegills that were caught in the net that were probably the first or last year's fry. And you can see those natural age groups between the fish. You can actually see that natural reproduction is occurring. It's occurring at multiple events. And that's an also great indicator of a very healthy water and water quality system where the fish are naturally reproducing. This is also great because it gives, again, it starts that food base, if you will, for the larger fish. And, you know, the predator species that everyone's usually fishing for, which are the crappie, the largemouth bass. And so those fish are able to provide a food source for those larger species. So in addition, we also in CCA will put out lagoon structures. And so when you think about lagoon structures, one of the things we have as stormwater retention ponds is that we keep them fairly clean. We keep all the, everything trimmed down along the edges. We don't have a lot of deadfall or dead trees falling in the lagoons. And so there's not a lot of structure. To improve the fishery, you need structure, and that gives the fish somewhere to hide from natural predation. Kingfishers, otters, alligators, they have you can imagine something, a fish can swim through this structure, these porcupine structures very easily. Some of the predators would have a lot more of a challenge. So it gives them a natural area to try to evade predation. And then it also gives you the fish kind of a comfort level, if you will. I always use the analogy, you rarely ever see a deer standing in the middle of a field. Our ponds with no structure in them would essentially be a giant field. It doesn't matter how many fish you put into it. If you don't have an environment that is able to make them comfortable, they're not going to succeed. And so these structures will help offset some of that natural material that's in the pond. And the other interesting thing is the picture on the top. A lot of times new residents will call and say, there's a duck decoy in my lagoon. What is that? Well, if you see the duck decoy, you're going to have these porcupine structures underneath it or similar fish structure underneath it. And the main goal with that, again, is these are stormwater retention ponds. And from a public works standpoint, the last thing I need is one of these pipe or one of these porcupine structures getting into the storm drain pipe itself and blocking off drainage. So the idea behind the duck is that you can actually, one, the fishermen know where the structures are, and then two, public works can monitor if the structure starts to move. We can catch it, reset it, put some additional weight on it to prevent it from getting into our storm drain system. And for the most part, if you see those ducks, you can understand that the depth is going to be about between 6 and 8 feet of water depth below that duck from a fishing standpoint. We've talked a lot about salinity testing. Again, this is another program that CCA provides for the Land Use Association. We typically test between 6 and 12 lagoons in-house. CCA with volunteers and with some meters that TLA provides goes out and twice a year conducts saltwater testing in all of our lagoons. And so that's really given us a great swath of data to be able to look at and see how these lagoons change, not only year to year, but how they also are affected by large events. A lot of times if we have a heavy rain event or we've had a king tide, we'll go out and take some additional sampling to be able to understand how that's affected the water chemistry within our system. And again, this is another program without the volunteers we wouldn't be able to do and have this information and data available for the community. One of the best programs, if you haven't had the chance to participate or attend, is the Kids Fishing Lagoon and the Kids Fishing Derby. This is a lagoon that's Lagoon 56, located off of Log Landing Road. It's specifically set up for kids. We do remove all of the large predator species of bass the best we can. There's still some very large bass in there, and really promote a pure bluegill population within the lagoon. And the goal is that be able to have a lagoon where you can take a kid fishing and you're not fishing, but you're catching. And so, historically with the Kids Fishing Lagoon and the Kids Fishing Derby, you can have 100 and 150 kids out there catching anywhere from, I think our best year was around 700 fish in an hour and a half to on average about 300 fish. So there's a lot of fish being caught. If you just enjoy walking, it's a beautiful lagoon. There's no houses around it. And there is a gumball style fish food feeder where you can actually throw some pellets in and be able to see those fish respond to the pellets. So even if you're not fishing, it's a great opportunity. 2018, CCA did fund a pavilion for that area. And then they have also held multiple events there, wildlife events, not only for fishing, but for other items to really bring kids out and get kids from, sitting playing their video games to being out in nature and enjoying and understanding that dynamic, which I think is a critical asset to our community. So with that, I try to stick within about 30 to 40 minutes, but I get long-winded a little bit. So I'd be more than happy to take any questions and be happy to answer anything I can.
Great, thanks, Sean. Just to give people some direction as far as how to ask questions, we want to use the chat function that exists in Zoom. And so if you look at your screen in your user or Windows, there's a little box down below that says chat. Type your questions in there and I'll read them off to Sean. If you're using an Apple-based product, either in the corners of there'll be an indicator that shows you that's more. There's availability. You just click on that where it says more, and the screen will drop down and allow you to put a question in that. The last thing I just want to mention too is we are recording the sessions because I know a number of people didn't get here right at the beginning. So this will be made available to the people that signed up as well as other members so they can watch this video as part of our library that we're building. So if anyone has a question, just send it along to me, and then what we will do is, first question has to do with I'm new to the landings, and okay, they're coming in. I said, what kind of storm event is the lagoon system designed to handle?
So there's multiple elevations along with lagoon events. Typically, the biggest gauge is about a 100-year event. One interesting thing and a lot of questions we always receive about the lagoons is how far behind the lagoon or how far along the edge of the lagoon does the association or the club own? And the rule of thumb is typically up to the top crest of the bank, and that is designed capacity within the lagoon. So for those to be maintained and taken care of and to be available for capacity, the lagoon system has that extra area, if you will, up to the crest of the bank. So in some of our saltwater lagoons, we don't own near as much property as we do in some of our larger freshwater lagoons. So it's hard to give you an exact answer, but typically all of our design capacity is going to be to a 100-year storm flood event. And then again, we have some of the management options with the hurricane valves to actually start to dewater some of the lagoons prior to any event and add additional capacity.
Okay, great. One of the questions we had this from time to time about fishing, catch and release. I mean, we do encourage that to keep the lagoons healthy as well. You know, continue based upon the studies that you do, allow you to keep things balanced and makes for, I'll call it good sportsmanship.
Yeah, absolutely. I think catch and release is important in our freshwater lagoons and in our saltwater lagoons. Again, there's only a certain carrying capacity with these lagoons as far as how many fish can survive within that system. So as long as we are managing it and we're taking that scientific based approach to the management, we're going to have a successful fishery. I will say small bodies of water can easily be fished, overfished and outfished. And so catch and release can be critical. Another part of this is it was with the electrofishing and the juvenile seining is being able to see kind of the age classes. The other thing you want to be able to see is that you have that next generation or size of fish to replace the larger ones when they die off or kind of either get caught or move out of the system, so that you don't have this big gap where you go from a great fishery to all of a sudden there's nothing but bluegill or small bass, little snake bass in the ponds.
Perfect. One of the questions came in, has to do with the decoys that you talked about, that, and maybe they'll can get to you directly, but there's, I guess, a couple that they noticed that the decoys are no longer upright. The structure's probably there and they probably look strange. So I'd say if it does happen from time to time, is they can reach out and tell you which lagoon.
Absolutely. C-click fix or email is a great opportunity to let us know which ones are like that. And understand that the decoy typically in those cases are looking very realistic. And a lot of times we'll have either ospreys, alligators, or other natural predation think they have an easy meal with a duck sitting there on the pond, and they'll swoop down and they can put a hole very quickly in some of our decoys and cause that slow leak.
Perfect. Question is around what's the alligator removal policy? Because we do see those in the lagoons from time to time here.
Sure. If you see an alligator in the lagoon, typically the state of Georgia manages the wildlife removal program for the alligators. They are animals of the state. The association does keep a log. So if you see any alligators that have either aggressive behavior or that you believe that need to be taken out, you can contact either the Georgia Department of Natural Resources or contact the association. And then we do keep a log for the trapper. How that program works is that the state will issue a permit for the trapper to come and remove the animal, and then contact the trapper, which is Trapper Jack. If you've ever seen him out and about by some of the lagoons, it's another great activity to watch him work. But then he is able to take the animal out. In most cases, he is not allowed to relocate. He has to destroy the animal, and he's typically paid by the rights of the animal with meat and hides. Smaller animals, if you have, say, a small, 2 to 3 foot alligator that gets in your swimming pool, or you just don't want anything under 4 foot, Jack is not allowed to destroy those animals. He will have to relocate them, and he will charge a fee directly to the person contacting. So the association won't pay for the small animals to be removed. So if there is smaller ones that you want to have removed, it would be, and it's typically around $100 for Jack to come out and remove the smaller ones. But the larger ones are any which that are showing aggressive behavior are going to be Jack's focus.
Okay, great, thank you. Question came up about what parts are all parts of the lagoon that touch the golf course off limits?
So interesting is if they are touching the golf course, they should not be fished. Anything within the play of golf. Main reason, safety. There is, and I've seen a lot of close calls, and we've had a lot of close calls from a maintenance standpoint, maintaining these ponds in and around the golf course, especially when you get focused on fishing, or in our case, maintenance, and you have a golf ball flying by very closely. The golf course owns about 1/3 of the lagoons throughout the community, and they are specifically designed as part of the play elements, and they don't allow any fishing on the side of play. If you're out of play in some of these lagoons or on common property, TLA common property, you're more than welcome to fish.
Okay. We have more questions. One of the things just want to make people aware of, if we don't get to all the questions, we are saving them, and Sean will pass them on to you so that if there's anything needs to be addressed. So there's probably maybe two more questions we can cover. So the statement is some of the lagoons are almost emerald green. Can you explain in more detail the purpose of this, evidently the dye, or why they are this color?
Yeah, so we actually use and we're just starting to roll that out this spring. And the goal is it's an aquatic dye that we put in. It's a combination of a blue-black color that typically when it goes in, you'll notice it being almost that kind of emerald green as you've noted. And then it goes to almost like a mirror finish. But the goal with the dye is to actually try to prevent sun penetration into the lagoon. If you remember in the water quality testing, we were talking about turbidity, the clarity of the water. The goal is to cloud up the water to the point where if you have vegetation that's growing in 6 to 8 foot of water that's crystal clear, it can grow very readily. The dye helps prevent a lot of that vegetation. And again, it's a preventative measure to reduce the amount of chemicals that have to go into the pond to control submerged vegetation and a lot of the algal blooms. And again, it's part of the management tool that's used. It is all food grade dye, and it is incredibly potent. 1 pint of dye can dye 1 acre pond that's 4 foot deep. So it's always interesting when we have some of our new employees that go out to start to dye and they don't have an appreciation for how concentrated the dye is. And they come back to the shop looking like Papa Smurf because they didn't listen on the proper way to put the dye into the pond. So very unique, and it is a preventative measurement for management.
All right, we'll cover 2 more questions. This next one is always the one that's asked, is which lagoons has the biggest largemouth bass? And if we all knew that, it would be great place to fish, I guess.
Yeah, there is. I'll say at any point in time, it could be any of them, any of our freshwater lagoons. Obviously, the larger freshwater reservoir, the bigger type lagoons typically hold a little bit larger fish. But in the spring and fall, you'll actually see those larger females moving into the smaller lagoons to start to nest and to sit on the beds. So depending on the time of year, it can be any lagoon, but for the most part, it's a little more consistent in our large freshwater lagoons.
Okay, like I said, there are more questions. Well, let's just do this last one. Is there any data on how many birds and animal species, heron, otters, alligators, that the lagoons support or encourage? Or is
Sure, we have a lot of information. I'll tell you, a lot of our information actually comes from a lot of our residents that go out and catalog. Fitz Clark is a resident that comes to mind, who is a great photographer and actually captures a lot of different species that utilize these lagoons, but the number is immense. The diversity on lagoons is amazing, and we do see some of the seasonality within the lagoons. We've had typically in the winter, we'll see a lot of otter populations move in from the tidal creeks and move into our lagoon systems, which is always kind of interesting when people first see those. They tend to think, they don't realize how large some of the native otters are, and we get the calls of dolphin or something is in my lagoon. How do we get this out? We'll also have a lot of turtles, amphibian species that live in the lagoons, oysters in some of our saltwater lagoons. We have freshwater mussels that work into our freshwater lagoons. So not only birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, it's critical habitat for all those items. And it's part of the reason that we have such a great diversity of wildlife here within the community.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Sean. Like I said, we'll pass those additional questions on and make sure that we respond and people can change them. Just give us a moment. We're going to switch over, and Dave, just checking with you, Dave DeVore, if you're ready. And we'll start the presentation in a moment.
Dave, are you there? Dave? Can you see the screen, Bill?
I'm unmuted now. I'm ready.
Okay.
Okay, I'd like to welcome all the new members and new residents to our Zoom seminar. We're in a period of transition right now. And the transition is we're moving off of Zoom partially. And this is our last total Zoom meeting.
Hold on, Bill. Hold on.
Last 4 o'clock meeting.
Hold on, Dave. What happened to the screen, Bill?
Can you see it? You should be able to see it.
I can't, I don't see it on mine, so I don't know how you're gonna see it. Hold on.
There we go. Can you see it now?
Yeah, hold on. Let me, I had it, it was all okay a second ago, but
You're
I'm not,
good.
mine's not working.
I can see it.
I can see it.
Yep. Should be able to see the, Dave, the wrap-up slide.
Okay, I see that, but I can't get it into the slideshow mode.
I'm sharing my screen.
Oh, okay. And the switch. Okay, Dave.
Can I work off of that? Okay.
Yep. Go ahead.
So
Tell me
this
what to
is
do,
our
Dave.
This is our last 4 o'clock meeting. Our meetings are going to transition back to the original time, which will be 7 p.m. And we're going to have capacity due to COVID. We'll be able to accommodate 50 attendees at St. Peter's Episcopalian Church for our May 10th meeting. Anyone that be for the first come, first served in terms of registration. Anyone that registers after that will be able to attend the meeting via Zoom. And we'll have further information out to you on that. This is also the 4th in our series of 4 seminars on landings lagoons. So we're going to move off island now, and our next presenter will be from the Ogeechee Riverkeeper. Very interesting. He presented to us 3 or 4 years ago. This is our, would you take me back to the calendar for a minute, please? Okay, this is our calendar through pretty much through September. So what we're looking at doing, the calendar is color coded, and anything in red, we need volunteers for. So if you're not a CCA member yet and you'd like to volunteer, there's a contact here at Bill Darsney, and we'll be communicating this information out to you. But we have a fresh saltwater fishing clinic coming up, and it's already maxed out. In May, we will have a freshwater fishing clinic. And in May 29th, we're going to have our annual Kids Fishing Derby. Now, traditionally, there's about 125 island kids participate in this, as well as a few off-island kids and their parents and grandparents. Once again, we're going through transition right now with COVID, and we're going to be COVID safe. We're looking for 50 volunteers, masked volunteers, socially distanced, to coordinate this event. And we're in the process of laying out the parameters for it right now. So you can look for our solicitation to you in the near future. Following that, we're looking to getting back into the Castaway Club. The Castaway Club is for residents of kids 3 to 15 here on the island. We teach courses in bats, snakes, turtles, bees on one Saturday morning a month, where the kids have some hands-on experience with local critters and varmints here on the island. And following that, we have a 1-hour fishing venue, particularly for the younger kids, showing fishing 101, how to bait a hook, how to cast, how to take a fish off a hook. And we have this all at the Kids Lagoon. And once again, we'll need volunteers for that as well. And if you're not really comfortable with that, it's a great learning experience for you to become comfortable with it. So this is what our calendar looks like right now, and we adjust it because it's a tentative calendar. We adjust it monthly. If you're not a member, we wish you'd consider becoming a member. It's $35 a year. You get a quarterly magazine from us. It features all of the chapters throughout the United States. There's write-ups on things that different chapters are doing, the activities are involved in. We're very involved in conservation advocacy, fishery management, like Sean was talking about just now, habitat conservation, and education and public outreach. And right now we're going heavy into education and public outreach, but we're still heavily engaged in the fishery management right now because we're coming up, we've done the stocking, we've done the electrofishing, we're getting ready for the seining, and Hal Evans is always putting out more ducks on the pond and checking for salinity. Our May 10th seminar, as I stated earlier, we'll be moving off the island to the Ogeechee Riverkeeper. And then we will have another meeting in June, tentatively be pertaining to the Savannah River, but that's not clearly defined yet. Now today we have a raffle coming up, and 2 lucky people are going to get to go with fishing with one of my favorite captains, Matt Starling. I was out with Matt about 4 years ago. We were tarpon fishing we had 3 tarpon that hit weighing between 85 and 95 pounds right off Wausau Island. It was quite an experience. And Matt fishes barefoot. He balances himself all around the boat. And so I have the names of the 2 winners. And once you determine that you've won, you'll need to contact Stan Fader, or Stan will contact you to coordinate the fishing trip. And the 2 of you will be going together along with Captain Matt Starling. So the first winner is James Tykowski, Tykkoski. And so Stan will ask you to contact James. I believe we have his email. And the second winner is Kathleen Flanagan. And both these are pretty much new names to me. I'm not sure I've met either of these people. And Stan, if you'd also contact Kathleen, they can get together and coordinate a date to go fishing with Captain Starling, and when they can coordinate a good time to get together. So that's all we have for now. And look forward to talking with you next month on, when is it, May 10th? May 10th. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Ciao.